Within clinical and forensic psychology, observing a victim subjected to chronic, severe family pathology typically yields a highly predictable outcome. The relentless pressure of coercive control routinely fragments the individual's sense of self, resulting in complex post-traumatic stress and total emotional subjugation. This systemic deterioration is particularly severe when the environment is governed by two specific pathogens: communal narcissism and red-collar crime. Clinical observation reveals a statistical anomaly. This plot maps the duration of extreme coercive control against an individual's executive function. While the primary trend line predictably plummets toward cognitive decline, a specific cluster of data points breaks off entirely, maintaining and elevating their functioning. Individuals in this anomalous cohort do not succumb to the psychological obliteration intended for them. They navigate the abuse and emerge as highly resilient, analytically lethal truth-tellers. We refer to this group as the competent scapegoat phenotype. Surviving an environment designed to aggressively overwrite reality requires three specific protective factors: high premorbid cognitive reserve, the psychological scaffolding of an early enlightened witness, and the synthesis of trauma into forensic cognitive weaponry. This psychological profile represents a structural resistance forged by the exact systemic pressures attempting to erase the individual's perception of truth. To understand the competent scapegoat, we must deconstruct the system that demands their subjugation. According to researcher Jochen E. Gebauer's model of communal narcissism, the abuser projects an outward facade of extreme, irreproachable altruism. Behind closed doors, this virtue signaling masks a profound lack of empathy and an absolute desire for control. When this communal pathology intersects with high-stakes financial exploitation, such as probate fraud or inheritance theft, the system escalates into red-collar coercive control. The abuser preemptively deploys extreme psychological warfare to silence anyone capable of exposing their deception, locking the family inside a strict reality distortion field. The tactics used to enforce the silence are highly calculated. The abuser executes a strategic campaign directly analogous to Zersetzung, a doctrine of psychological decomposition pioneered by the East German STASI. The goal is to systematically paralyze a target through covert harassment and gaslighting, destroying their confidence without leaving a physical mark. Within this micro-totalitarian family unit, the ultimate target for decomposition is the most observant member. This is frequently a gifted child exhibiting asynchronous development and a high sensitivity to existential truths. This child embodies the golden shadow. Their raw vitality, creativity, and deep emotional resonance cast a harsh, illuminating light on the abuser's internal emptiness and mediocrity. Like Cassandra in Greek mythology, they possess a prescient clarity that the community refuses to believe. Because this intellectual and emotional divergence threatens the authoritarian demand for absolute conformity, the system initiates a purification process. The family collectively projects its dysfunction onto the truth-teller, formally branding them as the identified patient to ensure their isolation. The scapegoat is targeted because their innate logical rigor functions as an internal thermometer, accurately reading the systemic defects and constantly threatening to expose the abuser's concealed psychological and financial corruption. The intended outcome of this continuous red-collar coercion is severe neurobiological wear and tear. Chronic exposure to psychological abuse typically overloads the body's threat response system, triggering HPA axis hyperactivity, systemic childhood inflammation, and elevated markers for adult neurodegeneration. The competent scapegoat counters this decay through robust cognitive reserve. This biological hardware gives the brain the remarkable ability to improvise alternate neural pathways, bypassing the structural damage caused by severe environmental pathology. High premorbid cognitive reserve provides a neurological scaffolding that sustains complex executive function. The brain continues to process logic and sequence data smoothly, even while the individual is trapped in an ongoing state of amygdala hijack. Working in tandem with this reserve is strong, effortful control. This regulatory mechanism allows the prefrontal cortex to manage and suppress the dysregulated emotional responses that the pathological system actively attempts to provoke. Intelligence also acts as a direct barrier to undue influence. Psychological manipulation and reality distortion operate functionally as coercive hypnotic suggestion. Forensic research indicates a strong inverse relationship between exceptionally high IQ and susceptibility to this kind of systemic thought reform. When the communal narcissist attempts to rewrite history or outright deny an event occurred, the scapegoat's advanced fluid reasoning rapidly cross-references the false claim against a vast, highly organized internal database of encoded autobiographical memories. The target inevitably suffers profound anxiety and emotional distress from the abuse. Yet, their biological hardware actively insulates their core reality testing mechanisms, preventing the abuser from successfully corrupting the reasoning process itself. With the biological hardware intact, the target must defend their epistemic agency. This is an individual's fundamental capacity to trust their own mind, synthesize knowledge, evaluate evidence, and act as a confident testifier of their own lived experience. Gaslighting and communal narcissism operate as systematic assaults on this exact capacity. The abuser's objective is to completely dismantle the victim's epistemic agency, forcing them to substitute the dictated regime of facts for their own sensory perception. The psychological software required to block this overwrite is often installed by an external stabilizing figure. Psychoanalyst Alice Miller identified this as the enlightened witness, a person in the child's early life who provides a powerful, unshakable conception of empathy, trust, and authentic love. Even if this witness lacks the authority to stop the dominant abuser, their validation teaches the child the toxic environment is the problem, not them. This specific recognition breaks the amnesia of body memory, preventing the child from accepting the transgenerational fallacy that the abuse is normal. Over time, the competent scapegoat synthesizes this external figure into an internalized, enlightened witness. They develop a conscious, highly analytical inner voice that continuously validates their reality, even when they are entirely isolated from external support. This internalized voice enables the clinical practice of differentiation of self. The scapegoat maintains a solid, cohesive identity while accurately categorizing the narcissist's accusations of malice or instability as projections of the abuser's own pathology. This psychological software draws a definitive line between a shattered victim and a resilient survivor. By anchoring the target's intrinsic worth, it permanently prevents the abusive family unit from successfully dictating the target's reality. Armed with cognitive reserve and an internalized witness, the scapegoat transitions into an active systems analyst. They analyze the pathological family as an ideological regime enforcing a false reality. To counter this, they engage in hermeneutical resistance. This matrix details how the target systematically refuses to accept the conceptual frameworks forced upon them by the abuser. When the abuser weaponizes social smear campaigns, the scapegoat deploys a tactic called testimonial smothering. Recognizing that logical debate with bad faith actors only fuels the narcissist, the target simply ceases to explain themselves, withdrawing their participation from the shared delusion. To combat revisionist history and gaslighting, the truth-teller instinctually adopts forensic pattern recognition. They accumulate vast amounts of high-precision, time-stamped documentation, obsessively externalizing their memory into secure archives to bypass any cognitive doubt the abuser attempts to induce. Faced with the implicit threats of red-collar concealment, highly analytical targets apply mathematical logic to their environment. By mapping out the frequency and escalation gradients of the abuse, they can predict behavioral anomalies and anticipate threat movements long before they materialize. Because coercive systems inevitably attempt to label the truth-teller as mentally ill, the competent scapegoat proactively seeks out independent mental health validation. Securing clinical documentation legally proves their reality testing is intact, neutralizing the abuser's primary discrediting tactic. Through meticulous observation and the strict structuring of behavioral signatures, the scapegoat builds an immutable external record. This cognitive weaponry exposes the communal narcissist's reality distortion field as a documented, fraudulent construction. The final synthesis of these protective traits results in the ultimate deployment of cognitive weaponry, education. The truth-teller rigorously learns the specific clinical nomenclature of red-collar crime, narcissism, and coercive control. Applying advanced psychological terms like projective identification and Zersetzung to their lived experience is deeply regulating for the victim's nervous system. It provides a precise framework to categorize, file, and process the trauma. This exact naming process shifts the locus of control entirely. The target identifies their experience as a predictable, standardized algorithm of pathological behavior. This realization strips the abuser of their terrifying mystique. They are reduced from an omnipotent figure capable of bending reality into a highly limited, fear-based clinical phenotype. The reality distortion field collapses. The target completes their evolution, insulated from the system's intended destruction. They step out of the isolation of the identified patient and assume their role as a forensically lethal witness to the truth. The competent scapegoat demonstrates how systemic betrayal can be transmuted into a calculated, structural resistance. By utilizing the correct neurobiological and psychological tools, the individual does not merely survive family pathology, they systematically deconstruct it.